So the idea of a community network and community support is really huge for what we do at GSBP. And actually, you're going to be hearing about that all night. And I have to say, I'm a little sorry to admit to all the IDP students, I don't know for sure that I could do what you've done. The courage, the strength, the just resilience in going to these sites and doing what you do is really, really powerful. Well, guess what? In 2019, the public good is global. And if we're not thinking that way, we're not really serving the public good. So our IDP students are right on the leading edge of understanding that global public good, which is really, really valuable. You're going to hear these great, inspiring stories of students that have met community needs, created partnerships, had all these adventures. It's wonderful, and when I said I really admire it because I'm not completely sure that I can do it, what these students do is really hard. It's challenging in lots of different ways, and part of what I love not only about these students but about the real practice of psychology is that we don't shy away from what's hard. You'll hear about what the students learned tonight. What I get to hear as dean from staying connected to our alums is that I get to hear what you will have learned from this experience a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now. You won't even know how this is going to impact your future in positive ways. Because you've been willing to really engage in this activity with us. So I hope you know that at GSBP we admire you, we're proud of you, and we also want to hear about your stories, not just tonight, but what you've learned from your stories over time, from what you've done here. So I don't need to talk any longer because I know I want to hear the stories and you do too. I am absolutely thrilled to introduce Dr. Judy Fox, who's the director of the International Disaster Psychology Program. She wears lots and lots of hats at GSBP and has many, many tasks, but you'll get to hear about her task in kind of coordinating the international disaster internships. So I'm really thrilled and want to thank Judy for all she does, and I'm super grateful to get to have her kick off this night for us. So thanks again for being here.
Well, welcome everybody. It's so great to see an enthusiastic crowd who's come out in 0-degree weather and really made the effort to support our students in listening to their stories tonight. So we're going to be getting onto that very quickly, but just want to also thank all the students who've come, all the alumni, our supporters, faculty, supervisors, everybody who's in the crowd tonight really is part of our IDP family, and we really appreciate the support that you bring for our students. Thanks to Claire Carroll, our event manager, for getting all of this together. And also Heather Rira and Allison Nolan for getting us together, our students and faculty, in our presentation today. So thank you guys. I hope you all had a chance to see the posters from the sites that students have prepared. If you haven't, take a look at the end of the presentations tonight, because they really speak to the work that people did at their sites. So as many of you know, the summer internship program happens in between the first and second year of our graduate program. And what happens in the first and second year are also field placements where our students do excellent training experiences right here at home. So they go abroad to do some great experience, but also have great community experiences, practicum experiences here at home. And today, our field placement director, Dr. Gwen Mitchell, is going to present our Excellence in Training Award to an organization that has just been a fabulous training experience for our students. So Gwen, why don't you come on up?
Good evening. So I want to read out very quickly the definition of this Excellence in Training Award. We crafted this a few years ago. We kind of started it in 2016. And this award honors supervisors and training programs at field placement sites who have made outstanding contributions to the training of our graduate students. Training contributions can include breadth and or depth of practice activities, innovations in how students are utilized in service delivery, contribution to diversity, and or other contributions to training graduate students in and around Denver. Maria Drost is the Maria Drost Counseling Center Clinical Training Program is our recipient this year, and we're delighted. We have a kind of a large group of folks here to honor. And it has been a deep pleasure. Maria Drost is a nonprofit mental health organization that is well regarded for its quality of training of service for now over 30 years. The clinical training program is the cornerstone program that enables Maria Drost to provide quality mental health counseling services to those in need, regardless of what they can afford. What's exciting about Maria Drost is they have a direct service center, but they also do have really innovative and embedded programs with schools, and refugee housing, and a lot of different things where our IDP students have really enjoyed and thrived and utilized this trauma training and global mental health specialty training that the program offers. Sandra Mann, the current ED, she and I actually started at the organizing training about the same time, and over the years have done a lot of consult calls on who would be a good fit where, and it's been a deep pleasure. And we were racking our brains, and it was just really nice to think about that we were able to at least label 15 students over the course of our 10 years starting. And currently 5 of our grads are affiliated. Sarah McCune, a recent grad, is a postgraduate fellow and is at the Access Center. Bonnie Fernell is a postgraduate fellow and is at the Integrative Care Center. Max Murray is a second-year postgraduate fellow and is with the Children's First program. Paige Dvorak is a second-year fellow and is with the Integrative Care Coordination Team. And then Ashley Quall was a postgraduate fellow and was previously with the Integrative Care Coordination Team and now contracts and does a lot of other work in and around Denver. So it's my honor, and it's a pleasure to collaborate with you, and I'd like to issue this award to the Chief Program Officer, Michael Webb, who I look forward to chatting more with later. He's been a big part of the training program over the years, and again, we can't thank you enough. It's really a delight to collaborate, so come on up. Congratulations. And please, you can say a few words.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me in the back? It seems a little strange to accept an award when this program and the students in it have made our work so much easier over the last 15 years. As was said, we have many interns and now staff members from this program, and your mission and training goes right along with ours, with the emphasis on cultural humility and trauma-informed care that we try to provide to our clients in a lot of different settings. It's always a natural fit, and it makes selecting interns from the IDP program very difficult, and training them very rewarding. So we'd just like to thank all of you. The internship and the clinical training program are the backbone of Maria Drost, and without that, we wouldn't be able to serve so many people who otherwise wouldn't be able to get services. And I would not be remiss to say that the IDP program has become one of the foundational components of our internship program. So again, thank you, and please keep applying, and we'd love to hold on to this relationship as much as possible. We've got some great people from this program in our staff today who are doing wonderful work. So look forward to hearing more about what you all have been doing over the summer.
Thanks.
Okay. So before our interns, students take the evening away, I wanted to say a few words. I've had the pleasure of developing and coordinating the internship program and hearing from them, keeping in touch with them before, during, and after this experience. But there's a whole host of faculty who really support both the preparation and the doing and the afterwards of this experience. So I wanted to acknowledge Gwen and Bree and Rohini. And do we have adjuncts here today for me to acknowledge? We have a whole host of adjuncts too that are part of our faculty. So I don't see anybody or I would call you out. But anyway, so thank you all for everything you do with our students. So our students traveled to 12 different sites in 11 different countries this past summer. And each of those countries and sites really require very unique ways of connecting to people and working with them. And they engaged in a lot of different kinds of work, from trauma work in countries where they're which are former conflict zones, in developing countries, and also in doing disaster mental health work for populations dealing with earthquakes and floods. So it's quite a varied group of experiences. They were in Liberia, Kenya, Nepal, India, Malawi, Cambodia, Peru, Chile, Serbia, Sri Lanka, and Northern Ireland. Did I miss anything? Okay. So really around the globe. And you'll see as they talk that this is a group with deep feelings and reactions about their experiences. Is that fair to say, group? Okay. Some are nodding. And really what those experiences meant for them personally and professionally. It really takes a lot of fortitude and persistence to do these internships. And this group really showed and excelled in both of those things. And I think as a faculty, we're very proud of them and really impressed with the work that they did. So I'd like to introduce Heather Herrera, who was in India this year, who is going to kick off their presentation. So Heather, take it away.
Hello, everybody. I promise I will be the last person to speak before we do our panels, because I know you want to hear about all the real stuff that happened over the summer. I wanted to give you an idea of what it's going to look like today. So we're going to have 3 separate panels, each discussing a different part of what it was like to do this international work. So the first discusses our pre-departure work, how we connected in country, and then reintegrating back into our lives here in Denver at home. The second, exploring cross-cultural experiences and related developments in global awareness. And then our last group will talk about how these experiences have impacted us professionally, personally, and what that time abroad has changed about our career paths. We absolutely welcome questions at the end. We'll have about 5 minutes after each panel to ask questions, so please don't be shy. We love talking about our experiences. Some of the stories that you'll hear from my peers are amazing and filled with joy, and others are more painful and hard to hear. The reality is that no matter the story, each of our experiences were transformative in who each of us are personally and as professionals. This year we'll hopefully be graduating with masters in IDP, if everything goes as planned. But our time abroad has allowed us to have a much greater understanding of what it means to be a global citizen and how to approach psychosocial work with humility, curiosity, and resilience, no matter where our work will take us. So thank you for coming, and our first group can come up now.
We're so excited to share our experiences with you. My name is Alyssa Noland, and I went to Belfast, Northern Ireland this summer and worked with an organization that works with kiddos who have experienced trauma and transgenerational trauma. So we are going to be speaking about pre-departure and just really talking about the preparation we put into preparing for the summer, what that looked like, and then when we were abroad, really like culturally how it like looked and felt to connect with the country we were in. And then when we got back, how we integrated our experiences into our personal lives and our professional lives. So I will now hand it over to our panel.
Hello, I'm Jenica Smith, and I spent the summer in Monrovia, Liberia, at the Liberia Association of Psychosocial Services. As I speak of the summer, I necessarily contrast it with other places I've lived and worked, which have included Kurdistan, Zambia, China, Canada, and the US. For some of you here, that may be a familiar or similar point of departure, and for others, it's definitely different. And I'll be speaking of pre-departure. Pre-departure is often a hectic time of visas, shots, packing, the last time I'll go for a hike in Colorado, or the last time I'll see my family and friends for the next 8 weeks. It involves preparation for coming work and attempts to get ready, however you might define that. It's also a time I love because it's part of the before. No matter how much preparation I've done, I recognize that whatever comes next will be unexpected. Once I've lived somewhere else for a while, all the open possibilities settle into a more solid and routine existence. But the beginnings, with all this uncertainty and newness, are thrilling in their own ways. The pre-departure logistics and actual process of getting to Liberia was unbelievably and almost deceptively smooth. I was granted a visa with no need for x-rays or other medical tests and with minimal paperwork. My visa arrived in the mail several weeks before leaving and not the day before. I only needed 3 flights and 1 visa to get to the country. The plane wasn't missing on the day of takeoff due to snow in a far distant state. I wasn't denied boarding for my flight, and I didn't arrive on a national holiday during which all shops were closed for the week and potable water was hard to find. Preparing in other ways was more challenging, but it reminded me of what I need to do every time I choose to leave or to work outside of my passport country. Working on language, extensive reading of history, current events, culture, and fiction, watching documentaries, and speaking with key informants were required elements of classes, and they proved useful as I went about adapting to my new home in Liberia. While the process was mostly smooth, one major challenge was facing another transition to a new country just 10 months after arriving back in the US from 4 years in Kurdistan. In some ways, I was eager to get back out into the world after being in this country, the one I don't need a visa to visit, because although I belong here as much as anywhere else, I had spent the prior 10 months feeling incredibly confused on an almost daily basis. In other ways, though, I was increasingly concerned about starting over yet again. The knot in my stomach had been quietly growing since last year's internship presentations. I kept asking myself, how can I possibly do this again? How can I go somewhere so new to me? A new culture, new transportation, new work roles and norms, new people, and then leave after just 8 weeks. I won't even have begun to get it. Of course, as usual, it wasn't entirely up to me, and the Liberians I worked with and met were immensely helpful in this respect. Reflecting back on the summer and the excitement and hesitation I felt before leaving has again shown me the privilege brought by walking through the world in my skin and with my passport. I think of my colleagues at the Liberia Association of Psychosocial Services, and I know how difficult it is for them and how uncommon it is for them to get this kind of chance, to spin the globe, put their finger on a spot, and actually consider going there. And even when they get that opportunity, it's almost guaranteed that their pre-departure experiences will be more complicated than what I encountered as I went to Liberia. As with each of my prior times of living elsewhere, I carry these lessons with me. And in looking towards future possibilities, I know at least some of the steps I can and should take to prepare.
Hello, my name is Ernesto Zapata, and I was in Belgrade, Serbia, which is the capital of Serbia, and I was with the Psychosocial Innovation Network, also known as PIN. So before I left to Serbia, there was this notion that I wasn't going to fit in. In fact, I became pretty overwhelmed by the societal context. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Serbia is a country that was once war-torn, and for that, there were many implications. Corrupt governments, slow economic growth, but most importantly, a history of violation of human rights, which has slowed the growth of progression in that realm. Being gay inside the US is hard, and outside the US it sometimes feels even harder, especially where it's getting better, as most Serbians I encountered would say. I say this because we are living in a time where subjects like these are highly sensitive, but also because I greatly relate to the difficulties that have occurred with this identity. So hearing it is getting better didn't comfort me. My mental health took a toll for a small portion of the time I was there, and finding a way to connect really was the last thing on my mind. However, over the course of some weeks in Serbia, things turned for the better. I realized it wasn't about the differences that exist between people, but rather the people you decide to surround yourself with. My turning point was Serbia World Population Day through UNFPA, also known as United Nations Population Fund, when PIN took us to speak to marginalized individuals, the trans community, those impacted by HIV and disabilities. It shed a light in this dark tunnel I was in, and seeing, hearing, and speaking to people from Serbia with these very similar or otherwise different struggles was difficult, yet oddly heartwarming for me. I experienced an overwhelming sense of appreciation for those people who were coming out to make themselves known, painting the face of what it meant to be who they are, despite what the grand scheme of things had to offer, which was not always pleasant. One story that stuck with me was that of a man who had contracted HIV sometime early in life, and the implications of it now being a part of who he is. He spoke in a way that made me feel sorry for him, but somehow I began to feel this connection I longed for. He was so open about his experience and trustfully shared it with a group of strangers, myself included. He emphasized how, despite his condition, he very much still enjoyed life and created a space to continue thriving as he was as a gay HIV-positive individual. Although I am not HIV positive, I very much took to his defense. I was moved and felt a surge to want to continue breaking down stigmas about people like me or similar to me. After all, you know what they say about assuming, and there's an ass out of you and me. So don't do it. Even more so fascinating was seeing Serbia's own citizens standing up for equal rights at World Population Day, including those at PIN. What I most enjoyed after the day was how let me start over. In fact, soon after I had revealed my identity post-World Population Day, they took note of how important it was to speak about this to our refugee youth. They made it a mission to expose the world to what often goes unsaid or misunderstood. Even more surprising was how willing the refugee youth were to challenge their perceptions and perceptions of others about such sensitive topics like the LGBTQ community. I became a lot closer to those at PIN. I had felt the love and feeling of being welcomed the day I first stepped foot there, but more so after this experience. What I loved most about PIN too were their values, which were centered around hard work, dedication, but most importantly, interpersonal communication and connection with one another. They highly emphasize a work ethic of creating unity and advocacy outside and within their organization. PIN taught me to be the same. They taught me to challenge myself and push myself, because only through hard work and dedication can I give to the world what I have to offer. In the 2 months we were there, they allowed us to become part of their family. We learned a lot about one another and shared a special recognition of what it meant to be working psychologists and therapists and what the work meant for us. I dedicate my ongoing and new understanding of psychoeducation, trauma, and therapy to them. These experiences, coached with these core values, have brought me into light what I want to do. I want to continue expanding my desire in working with children and adolescents by guiding them through everyday disparities that have pushed them to feel like they have no control. I want to teach those who feel their lives have been predetermined and whose lives have been struck down by experiences that have taken away feelings of innocence and right to enjoy life, that they still have a chance. They have resilience and they can get better. Simply put, I want to help people find the change that will create for them a feeling of, I am okay and I can do this. Would I do Serbia and Pin all over again? Without a doubt.
How's this for volume? Okay. My name's Claire Krisman, and I spent my summer in Kathmandu, Nepal, working for Voice of Children. The organization worked to rehabilitate and educate children who were living on the street away from their families and reintegrate them into a family setting. So I'll talk about my reintegration back here. How was your trip? Was it amazing? Was it heartbreaking? Do you miss the kids? These, among so many other questions, were ones that I dreaded being asked upon return. And of course, everybody wants an answer, but that answer better be succinct because their eyes are going to start to glaze over. And there's no way to sum up my experiences in just a few sentences. So what happens when there isn't a word in the dictionary or even a combination of them that you could put together to explain what you were feeling? I've always been someone who compartmentalizes my emotions. Good and bad feelings, happy and sad, but for the first time in my life, I was unable to do so. I was crying with a friend once and sharing a memory that on the surface seemed positive. I was told comfortingly, don't be sad, it's a happy memory. But in that moment, I realized it's not that simple. I can't remember the good times that I had with the kids while now also thinking about the broader context of my experience. The kids made me feel so full of love and joy, but they came from incredibly hard lives, all of which had histories of living on the street, currently living away from their families, and most of them wearing really awful physical scars of evidence of severe abuse. To pick a memory and label it solely as happy is impossible because it's intertwined in something so much more complicated. And at the same time, I can't look at any memories as purely sad or negative. Even the hardest memories go hand in hand with evidence of these children's resilience and the meaningful moments I shared with them. When I was there, I had to put a lot of my emotions on the back burner for the sake of moving forward every day. But those emotions really took over when I returned. I spent some time in Los Angeles with my parents when I first came home, and the sense of safety I felt allowed me to finally release it all. I slept a lot, and I cried a lot, and oddly, I felt overwhelmed by daily tasks. My mom asked me once when I first arrived home what I wanted from the grocery store, and I couldn't answer. And I was having a hard time picking my clothing out. It was all very anxiety-provoking because I was used to having 5 shirts and 3 options at the grocery store for what I was going to eat that night. And so the amount of options that we have here really began to upset me because I realized on a deeper level how materialistic and overindulgent our society can be. And the emotions and the memories from harder days really took over at times and still sometimes do. One day in particular still really follows me. I became close with one child, and I will never be able to unhear blood-curdling screams of a child with an untreated and very severe ear infection. And this one hit me where it hurt. I grew up with chronic ear infections, and I know the pain, but I would go to a doctor, and I was consistently in and out of a doctor's office. And I never had to go a day or 2 without medication. And I know what it feels like to just want your mom or dad to hold you when you feel horribly sick. And this child was experiencing a level of both emotional and physical pain that I never had to as a child. So while I understood the difficulty of taking him to the hospital, there are so many logistical problems. This one day still left me with a level of anger that I've never felt before and still really struggle with. Taken up boxing, and with each punch though, I don't imagine the workers in Nepal because it's not their fault. I visualize an entire system that's failing children that could allow them to even get that sick. Coming back to America posed me with another challenge. a nearly unbearable amount of guilt. I know now the reality and the gravity of the situation that Voice of Children deals with. And here I am in my cozy apartment at my cozy school in America, unable to do anything about it. And my role there was small, but I had a really profound sense of purpose when I was doing it. The days were long, and I often felt really defeated. But there's nothing like teaching a child how to count on his fingers one day, and then 3 days later, seeing him teach another child to do the same. And it was those small moments that really made me realize I was truly making a difference. But then I was home and away from them. And my feelings of helplessness really became profound, and my entire life appeared to lack meaning for a little while. I would ask myself, what am I doing here? I have done nothing to deserve anything I have, and I'm doing nothing to pay the universe back for these everyday luxuries I indulge in. But realistically, the organization is doing fine without me. There's hopefully another intern there having a wonderful impact on the boys. And I'm in this graduate program because I do want to make a difference. So I'm telling myself, no, Claire, you are doing something. But I realized that I needed that direct sense of purpose-based action in my life. It wasn't until I really got started at my internship with Griffith Centers for Children, where I'm at currently, where I started to regain the sense of purpose. I work as a therapist primarily with children involved in the court system for truancy, abuse and neglect, and foster care situations. I read one of my first case files, and it consisted of 6 typed, single-spaced pages of just abuse history on one child. And I cried, but not because I was sad for the child, which I was, but I'm prepared to see that. I cried because for the first time I was able to make the connection between Nepal and here. And that flood of those chaotic emotions took over, but somehow I felt a sense of peace that I haven't since I had returned. My helplessness was really retaken over by the purpose and passion that I had gained in Nepal. My next steps are continuing to integrate my experience into my current narrative. People assume that my time in Nepal is in the past. Everyone wants to hear about your time and your adjustment for the first week, but then life moves on. And you get sort of forgotten about at times. And since that first week back, no one really asks me how I personally am handling it. And I still struggle with my emotions around it. I'm having to live with the reality of my experience and figure out how my life here fits into my life there. But I'm realizing that there's not Nepal versus here. It's that Nepal is a very critical experience in a long, complicated, and wonderful life that I know I'm going to live.
My name is Munir Kermani. I was in Peru working with the organization Paseo. I will just be reading a poem by Nicomedes Santa Cruz called El Café, or The Coffee. To Hugo Guerrero Martinez. I have your same color and your same origin. We are aroma and essence, and bitter is our taste. You traveled to New York with a visa in Bab el-Mandeb. I, my tropic, crossed from Abyssinia to the West Indies. I am like you, seeds. They are a coffee bean. In colonial times, you saw me in the thicket with my liana at the waist and my timpani, partner of my ills. I transplanted myself. You came up and I progressed. In the best hotels, they told you how good you smell. And I nodded, oui, oui, monsieur. You, fine porcelain, pure cigar and cognac. I, in a tuxedo. I, in tails. I receive a tip. You to the stock exchange. I to ruin. You went up, I went down. On the docks, I found you. I saw that they threw you into the sea, and I couldn't help it. Nor did I throw myself into the waters. And we met the pawn with his coffee cart, and talking with the worker, we toured the nation. There was talk of revolution among sips of coffee. I took the machete. I hesitated. You gave me courage, and blood and fire and sweat, my freedom conquered. Then we saw the poet, far, thoughtful, wanting to fix the world with a single foursome. I turned into a paseta. I rolled up into his plans. What eyes I lit up, what a trilogy we formed. The poor who alms, the poet, and his coffee. I have your same color and your very origin. We are aroma and essence, and bitter is our flavor. Come, brothers, courage. Coffee asks us for faith. And Chango and Ochun and Agwe ask for a shout that vibrates for free America, free as a coffee.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about some cross-cultural experiences from over the summer. My name is Alex and I was in Cambodia, and we're going to be hearing a little bit about the cross-cultural competency issues that people dealt with over the summer and how they managed them.
Hi there, everyone. Can you hear me? Yeah? Awesome. Even in the back. Good to go. My name's Jensen Green, and I was in Kathmandu, Nepal this summer at the organization called Voice of Children. And again, like I think you've already heard, the Voice of Children organization is for the rescue, rehabilitate, and reintegrate purpose of youth kids living on the street in Nepal. The experience of working abroad in a culture different than my own was everything I thought it would be, along with everything I would have never expected. The cultural elements of Nepal opened a new lens of depth, curiosity, and gratitude. For meeting the same dollbot literally every single day, to learning how to walk on the opposite side of the street, which let me tell you is very difficult, to understanding the impact of being a female in a country where the male population is dominant, even down to the language barriers I experienced every day. The cultural immersion was real and extremely overwhelming. Culture shock, you ask? Well, to my surprise, despite all of these hurdles, after spending just over 8 weeks in the beautiful, chaotic country of Nepal, I had never felt more alive, more included, or more accepted. It all started during the celebration of Teachers' Day at Voice of Children. My country group and I were awarded with tika, which is just a red little mark put on your forehead. It's kind of a blessing and given in respect on special occasions, usually. We were also given a beautiful bouquet of flowers and then a traditional Nepali scarf. Along with these gifts, the boys at Voice of Children, one by one, shared their appreciation and their respect for each of my group members, there's 3, individually. I vividly remember sitting in the hall, being surrounded by both the children and the staff at VOC, and just realizing that this was the place I could now call home. Towards the end of the celebration, I was scanning the room filled with excited boys and grateful staff, and I couldn't help but tear up at the unforgettable feeling of wholeness I had in that moment. And I tell you what, that was only the start. Thinking back to the first week I was at the organization, I sat down in the classroom next to one of the boys who had immediately opened up to me, which, let me tell you, that's hard as it is. He gave me the most serious look, and he boldly asked me, "What is your dream?" I was taken back. I was like, okay, first off, I haven't been asked this since maybe elementary school. I couldn't tell you. But finally, I gathered all of my thoughts, and I sat there, and I looked at him, and I said, well, my dream is to be here with you. My dream is to be loved, and my dream is to be happy. He nods his head in the most sincere way, but of course, you know how kiddos are. They're like, yeah, I'm cool, but it's fine. And then he scoots closer to me. He puts his hand on my hand, and he says, my dream is to have a home, to be happy, and to be with you here. And from that moment on, I knew this is where I was meant to be. So long story short, regardless of the overwhelming emotions I felt during my time there, the individuals at Voice of Children, with all their compassion and patience, turned the disorientation of my culture shock into true feelings of unconditional support felt both during my time there and 7,000 miles away here in Denver. A question I've been asked since returning home is, if you could go back and say one last thing, what would it be? And my answer is simply this. I'd go back and I'd say thank you. I'd say thank you to my supervisor, who was constantly there to hear us out. Thank you to the staff who were so kind each and every day. And most importantly, thank you to that little boy who not only shared his dream with me, but through undeniably the hardest experience of my life, turned my dream of being loved and happy in a country other than my own into a reality. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jessica Weiss, and I work with St. John of God Hospitality Services in Malawi over the summer. St. John of God is a Christian organization that focuses on providing mental health services to the underprivileged populations across the world. Since I returned from my internship, I've been asked many questions about my experiences in Malawi. The question that people tend to ask me first is how I coped with the political demonstrations in Malawi. The first few times I was asked this, I was caught off guard because the demonstrations, as present and as critical as they were not the most impactful part of my experience. I interned in the outpatient clinic in the Vulnerable Youth Program at St. John of God, where I was able to work in contexts that filled me with passion and where I made meaningful connections with coworkers. That being said, I was definitely terrified by the demonstrations at first. Malawi was and is knee-deep in turmoil following the presidential election in May 2019. The first I heard about the demonstrations was in the middle of a session with a client, where the noises of the busy street outside became overwhelming. My coworker turned to me to ask if I was living safely within the compound. It was not until this question that Kesa, our coworker, and I had to flee to our guest house, as the clinic was so filled with tear gas that the air was opaque with it. Kesa and I spent a few hours hiding in the guest house, with tear gas canisters hitting the walls outside, before the director of St. John of God, Charles Massimani, drove back into the chaos to personally take us outside the center of Mzuzu to his beautiful home up in the hills. I remember settling down on his big comfortable couch as his wife buzzed around preparing our room for us. As my flight, fight, or flees response slowly faded away, which I'm feeling right now, Kesa and I chatted with Charles' 11-year-old son, Yanko, and I began to feel at home. The next day, I started up a blog to share my experiences with my friends and family. This disruption from work gave me the time to publish a few posts. The title for my first day of demonstrations was originally titled Momentary Evacuation from St. John of God. Then I reflected and recognized that my experience was not about having to leave the compound due to an uncharacteristic safety risk, but that my experience was about the warmth and compassion of the people that I have had the privilege to meet and work with in that short period of time. The new title is now Malawian Hospitality, which better reflects my experience. Another day that we were visiting Charles's home, his son Yanko saw me working on my blog and wanted to read some of it. I turned my laptop to him and he read a few posts, pausing to ask me some questions. Children have this unique ability to take complex adult concepts and turn them into something simple and understandable. So I asked him, what do you think is the most important thing for people in America to know about Malawi? After contemplating for a moment, Yanko replied, kindness. He said it's important for Americans to know that how kind Malawians are and how important it is to be kind. I couldn't agree with him more. Working in Mzuzu through the demonstrations raised some challenges, all of which were addressed through the robust network of people that I was able to meet and become close with in the country. I quickly learned what information from our travel advisory apps were typically partially correct, but not comprehensive and sometimes just plain wrong. The most accurate information regarding the threat level in Malawi and most helpful resources we could access were gathered through our local contacts. The fact that we didn't evacuate Malawi became almost a running joke to the locals. We were the Americans who didn't run away. The guards would laugh and ask us what we thought about their political process. Our coworkers in the clinic would smirk and say, it's good to see you again. And our supervisors would openly express their surprise and approval through jokes that we were Malawian now, or surviving demonstrations will look good on your resume. I was motivated not to leave internship early because I felt a deep connection to my work, as well as my relationships with coworkers and my new friends. But I struggled with something throughout my time in Malawi, which I will ask you to consider today. Where is the line between immersion and voyeurism? Despite being warmly welcomed, and despite knowing that I was doing meaningful, impactful work, I still felt a complex tension between the two concepts of immersion and voyeurism.
I'm very short, and I'm feeling it right this minute. Well, and I'm leaning across the dog. So. Hi, I'm Juliet Madsen. My service dog Butch and I went to Concepcion, Chile. No habla español, so I'm not going to try and say the name of the establishment that I went to. Just for you, Gwen. And especially for Bree. There are so many things I wish I could share with you tonight. Chile was incredible and so different from home. Everything from the ridiculous amounts of food that they tried to feed me at every single meal, of which there were 4 every day. And I was told at every single meal that I was a bird and that I ate like a bird, and they were constantly shoving food at me. It was ugly. The last meal of the day was around midnight, so I was very confused all of the time, and half the time I was there in my pajamas trying to eat. You don't want to see that. Anyway, another thing that was strange was at the beginning of every single meeting, they wanted to hug and kiss every single person who came to the meetings, which at big meetings could take 20 or 30 minutes, which could slow down the process. My culture shock continued with packs of wild dogs that were so incredibly smart that they would cross the streets at the crosswalks, and they would wait for the lights to turn green. Butch is not that smart. So, I watched during earthquakes as people I was with thought nothing of it and told me to do as the Chileans would do. During my first earthquake that took place in a cafeteria, all of the people looked up, commented and laughed at the length of the earthquake and the severity of it, while I was turning green because I was so nauseous, and Butch stood up and let out a yelp, and they all just kept eating. So it was little things like this that were very confusing. But the Chilean people are incredibly strong. They're not afraid of earthquakes. They're not afraid of floods, which we also had while I was there, or the mudslides that follow, which we also had while I was there. They walk around through or on top of whatever gets in their way. I was taken in by everyone I met and introduced to their cultures and traditions. But perhaps one of the things that stands out the most while I was there was that disability is not understood. This understanding, as I see it, began actually while I was here in the United States. Flying into Chile with an 86-pound chocolate lab, not easy. Before you ask, yes, Butch flew with me. He flew under the seat in front of me. That's not a very big space. LATAM Airline in Chile wanted Butch to wear a muzzle in fear that he would go rogue on the flight between Santiago and Concepcion and attack someone on the flight, which, if you ask my classmates, is kind of comical. At the airport, many people asked if he was a police dog. People in Chile wanted to understand Butch and why I had them, but mainly people were afraid of him because they had been bitten by stray dogs and didn't understand what a service dog was. Stray dogs literally chased us down the street on several occasions. A few weeks after I got to Chile, I had an aha moment when someone came into the office that I was working in and explained that she had heard there was a service dog on campus, and she had always wanted to see one for herself. She told me what she thought a service dog was and how they could be used, and then asked so many questions. She was in the office for 2 hours, just question after question, through a translator, mind you. No habla. It's okay. So, she explained why it was so exciting for her country that service dogs had been legalized in 2015. She explained that finally, people who were disabled would have a voice. It was an incredible moment that I realized how many people had no voice, and I wanted to learn more. I learned things like 13 out of 20 children who are born deaf in Chile never go to a formal school. None. Not elementary school, not high school, not college, nothing. That's striking. If you're in a wheelchair, you're never likely to attend school. When you walk the streets there, you never see anyone with crutches. You never see anyone who's blind. None of that. It's not like here in the United States where service dogs are a dime a dozen, sort of. For me, because service animals are still a recent idea in Chile, most people would not let me in at all. I had to show them a copy of the law, a copy of a letter from the university, and then argue with them in my no habla español Spanish. Lots of, sí, pero, sí, pero, and they'd be like, no, pero. Yeah, not pretty. So, after my aha moment, I started to ask people I had met if they had ever seen a service dog, if they ever knew what a service dog was, or if they knew what a disability was. From there, many incredible conversations about service animals and disabilities grew. Because of these questions, I was able to work with programs I had already set up to work with, but having a new understanding of this need, I also had incredible impromptu conversations at corner stores, on the street, everywhere I went, about Butch, about how he helps me, about what people with disabilities are capable of. Over time, I realized that the one thing that I was doing because of Butch was making a real impact on disability awareness. People began to search us out. Disability became something that was ingrained in every single thing I did. It's on our poster. We even went viral for the country of Chile because he was a service dog, and we actually were the first service dog ever in this one museum, which is kind of crazy. Yeah. Of course, they did say that we were a blind service dog, which means that I'm blind. But anyway, disability is part of me, and now it's part of the larger conversation in Chile, and hopefully it's part of a larger conversation in this room. So thank you very much.
Also very short, so I'll be pulling this close. My name is Heather Rera, and this summer I was in Chennai, India. I'm going to read a poem that I wrote while I was in country during a time when I was struggling a lot with the complacency of Indian culture and the perspectives towards women that I saw around me. Despite the intelligence and the strength of my coworkers and all the women I met throughout my experience, I couldn't help but feel affected by the lack of respect and value that I saw them go through and came to experience firsthand. There's a sense of acceptance that women are regarded as less important than men, always have been, always will be. It permeates so much of the culture, so much so that there's a saying that the cows in India have more rights than women. While I think both groups deserve more protection than they have, this quote was true to my experience this summer. I found myself flipping through the pages of the newspaper each morning, horrified to hear of baby girls being abandoned in sewers because of families' anticipation they could not afford a dowry in her future. Distressed to learn that when a woman set herself on fire in an attempt to take her life, that this news was so commonplace, it only garnered a small blurb on the 7th page of the newspaper. For perspective, at least one full page a day was devoted to our own Donald Trump. Growing up, I was always fascinated with Eastern religions. I felt that they captured something that Western religions might be missing, whether it was a sense of connectedness to one another, an understanding that each person has a duty towards their spiritual practice. This is one of the reasons I was so drawn to India in the first place. After some time in Chennai, I felt disillusionment towards a spirituality I once regarded as kind and compassionate. I saw its practitioners pay more attention to the deities than their own suffering neighbors, and I simultaneously felt frustrated with myself for this perspective. I tried to remember what I originally felt connected to, and I thought of the lotus flower. The lotus has often been regarded as a symbol of peace and resilience, referenced often in religion and culture for its duality. It starts out as a bud among the lily pads, often submerged in water, and eventually opens up with bright colors and a sacred symmetry. Unlike other flowers, what makes it so special is its ability to bloom in murky, muddy water surrounded by fish and insects. Despite the seemingly harsh conditions that are experienced by its roots, the flower often presents itself as externally perfect. I took some time to remember the countless, amazing, powerful women that I met in Chennai and that I felt deeply connected to, and I wrote this poem with them in mind. I asked to be planted in a place where great things, ancient things were born, hoping I too could grow outside myself. But when they set me in the ground, the dirt was hard and unforgiving. The rain hadn't come for weeks, and I saw death all around me. I began to believe that those walking past saw us wilting, yet looked down past their noses, unshaken by the desolation that marked their morning commute. I felt anger and despair at the clouds and at the commuters, towards any living thing not tending to the fields. But now I see that though a shallow, dirty pond covers the ground for miles, there are countless lotus flowers blooming, opening with wild color. And they did more than just tolerate the times of drought and unbearable heat. They bloomed because of it. They dug their roots into the cloudy water and turned their faces towards the sun. Thank you.
Crushed. So context for folks who don't know what's going on. There was a recent bus fare increase. Maybe 3 weeks ago? Does that sound about right? And in that governmental decision to raise the fare for the bus, riots broke out across the major cities in Chile. And to crush the uprising, the government put tanks and soldiers across the country to hush people. The university that I was working with was closed, and I actually have been in contact with almost everyone that I worked with, and they, I've heard stories of friends of mine stranded in airports without any services, including water, because they've turned the water off, and they've had soldiers with guns drawn on them. The most interesting is I worked at a dementia center while I was there, and the elderly who have dementia are having flashbacks of Pinochet's regime, and so they think that they are in the middle of being attacked by Pinochet's soldiers. And I asked how I could help. And the response was, "You already have." And I was confused. And Javier said, I had done a complex trauma program. I had written up a whole program and done a PowerPoint, and I had trained there with him. I'm doing research with him. And he actually mass-produced what I had done and trained his facility as well as the other facilities. And then he actually took that back to the university and started doing that with other providers. So what we do it doesn't stop when we leave. But I checked on them on the way here. It's crushing. You know how I feel about them, even though I can't habla.
We're going to continue by speaking about personal and professional growth because that's a huge part of the summer experience. And my name is Kat Foley. I was working in Monrovia, Liberia with the Carter Center this summer. And it was definitely a huge professional growing experience for me. So I look forward to hearing what our panel has to say. And so we're going to be talking about how did your experience influence your sense of professional direction, as well as what did you learn about yourself as a professional. And we are quite literally all over the map, as you can see. And first up, we'll talk to Sarah.
Hi. So when I landed back in the United States from Nepal, I went straight home, walked through my front door to a surprise gathering of 4 of my closest friends, threw my bags on the floor, and sobbed into their arms. The transition back from Nepal has not been easy, to say the least. It felt like a whirlwind, spinning me around and leaving me on my backside, dizzy, confused, and tired for weeks. It wasn't until 2 weeks ago that I actually told someone, my supervisor at my current internship, that I felt like I had my feet planted on the ground for the first time since leaving Nepal. Now that I'm back, realizations have been coming to me slowly about how I have grown or changed personally and professionally because of Nepal. I know I learned a lot about patience, flexibility, and communication because working across cultural and language barriers to care for children or lead a training about childhood trauma isn't necessarily a walk in the park. I learned that I do my best work when I feel the love and support of my family and those closest to me. Whether due to distance, an 11-hour and 45-minute time difference, or something else entirely, I learned that when support is compromised, I struggle to stay present in my professional work. I know I learned how meaningful it can be to persevere through awkward and confusing interactions with people from other cultures, only to have them open their homes, families, and hearts to me. I learned that I'm happiest when I take pleasure in the small moments, like when I danced in the pouring rain with the boys that I worked with, who both broke and melted my heart every day I was with them, or when I watched the fog rolling over the mountains in Nagarkot. While I learned a lot about myself, it's not yet clear to me whether I see myself committing to international work. But what I do know is that I am constantly changing and adapting, and that I will continue to learn from my experience in Nepal for the rest of my life. In the words of Heraclitus, everything flows and nothing abides. Everything gives way and nothing stays fixed. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sam North, and I went to Belfast, Northern Ireland, and interned at Belfast Trust, an organization that works with kids with trauma. The first response I typically have when talking about my experience is letting people know that Northern Ireland is in fact a completely different country than Ireland. And it's this difference where the conflict in the country's history arose from. From the late 1960s to the late 1990s, there was a period of time known as the Troubles. Simply stated, there was a group of people that wanted Northern Ireland to remain as part of the United Kingdom, and there was another group of people that wanted Northern Ireland to unite with Ireland into one. Although the peace agreement was signed in 1998, when I got off the plane this past June, the divide was still present. There's a quote from Aristotle that says, "Educating the heart without educating the mind is no education at all." And from my time in Belfast this summer, I can only wholeheartedly agree with that quote. During this experience, I learned that I'm good at feeling compassion and becoming invested and inspired by the people I have the privilege of working with. We would sit in cheerfully colorful rooms and listen to horrendous and heart-wrenching accounts of child abuse. We were then supposed to provide feedback and support to the social workers and the foster care parents that worked with these kids. However, I remember sitting in the room, desperately wanting to provide an answer, and instead barely being able to respond at all. This experience also made me learn that being too attached and involved, or not being able to separate from the work, can be detrimental. And I saw this in myself when I could not shake the images or thoughts about certain families, even after coming back home. Something else I learned about myself as a professional is that I need to have empathy towards people who normally don't receive it from the general public and don't meet society standards for who deserve it. Working with children who had often been removed from their homes meant that the parents or caregivers were often the ones causing or inflicting traumatic experiences, but we also learned that most of these adults had trauma histories of their own. It became apparent that stopping the cycle of abuse is more important and more impactful than just preventing violence in the current moment. This internship reinforced my passion for working with kids in general, specifically those with trauma. It also showed me pieces of the human experience that I hadn't witnessed before. It taught me to recognize and acknowledge the dichotomy of both beauty and pain existing together. It existed in so many realms of the culture and people that we interacted with. We saw firsthand the tension and separation that remained. When preparing for the trip, we were cautioned by someone who grew up in Belfast that questions about religion or sports, asked nonchalantly, were not innocent, get-to-know-you questions that we thought they were, but rather a way for people to feel out which side or group we were with. July 12th was a day that half the country celebrated with parades and bonfires, and the other half viewed as a taunting display of power, both of which are opinions we learn not from a textbook or from an internet search, but from our very, very vocal Uber drivers. And in fact, much of what we learned about the culture, we couldn't ask directly about, but learned when we really listened. When we listened to those same Uber drivers, when we went out to dinner or drinks, and when we listened to our maintenance man who thought we were old friends and would drop by occasionally unannounced just to say hi. We continued to learn about the existence of beauty and pain from our colleagues. We would hear stories about a teenage boy destroying property or vandalizing with friends, who was the same boy who couldn't sleep at night because he was worried gangs from the opposing side would come to get him. Or the first time we made the 9-mile round-trip walking commute to the office, we passed by the Peace Wall, a tangible symbol of the war's end, and felt the significance of what that must have meant. However, on the same walk, we saw alternating streets of both Republican and Loyalist flags, silently identifying who was welcome down one street and who was not. From this experience, I decided that I wanted to know more about how we as mental health professionals and members of the larger human family can make sure that we are finding, highlighting, and nurturing the beauty in each person to help them through the pain that likely also exists. Although we had to leave Northern Ireland behind with many questions of what happened to the children we consulted on and what their futures may hold, my hope is that through my future work, those children will not be forgotten. I am thankful to this trip for the good days and the bad, because there were definitely both. The impact that those kids and families had on us without ever getting the chance to meet them in person is something I am deeply grateful for and will continue to have a legacy and impact on my work and unquestionably on me as a person. As I began with a quote, I will leave you all today with Irish song lyrics a little closer to the experience of Northern Ireland. Now the music is gone, but they carry on, for their spirit's been bruised, never broken. They will not forget, but their hearts are set on tomorrow and peace once again. Now what's done is done, and what's won is won, and what's lost is lost and gone forever. I can only pray for a bright, brand new day for the town I love so well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Megan Kearns, and I went to Chennai, India this summer, where I worked with the Schizophrenia Research Foundation, helping to provide mental health services for low-income populations and conduct research. I want to start by reading a social media post that my country partner Heather had found while we had our sleepover at Gate 7 of the London airport on our way home. That really typifies my experience this summer. I spent this summer unpacking a box. It's filled with things I believe about myself. Many of them were handed down to me by those that raised me. Many I took out, or many I collected because they posed as friends. But when I took them out and held them to the light, I realized they were tormentors, wreaking havoc on my mind and body until they forced me to stop ignoring them, to listen, to unpack, and learn. Sometimes growth looks like taking a few steps backwards, and courage is not an act of heroism, but a voice, quiet in the din, that speaks the truest truths and the most sacred truth of all. I am enough. I am loved as I am. This summer, I had an intense, complex experience, and I've tried my best to keep unpacking my own boxes, but just like moving in real life, there's a kitchen full of half unpacked boxes, my cats are getting into who knows what, and there's a sofa sitting in the middle of my doorway. One of the boxes I got the chance to unpack was labeled family, and it showed up while my cousins visited one weekend. I saw these two strong and powerful women who were very similar to me. They're the same age as me. We share a lot of the same values. We all have the same Indian nose. But they grew up in Ludhiana, Punjab, my mom's Nankay, the village where my mom was born. Well, I grew up in Parker, Colorado. In that weekend, I saw what my life could have been. My cousins shared some of their stories, and while I bore witness to them, I also heard what my struggles could have been. And it soon became surreal, and I began unpacking the box of my family dynamic and history and how that shaped me as a person. The next box held my inner monologue, written on the side of this box in big black Sharpie. Inside was this hypercritical, judgmental, relentless voice that had once served a good purpose. But over the summer, I came to realize it was holding me back in a lot of ways. This voice had been the loudest one in my head for years and always had an opinion. This voice was meant to keep me safe, to keep me from being hurt, from the criticisms that others would maybe pass. It also kept me from trying and failing. It kept me from disappointing those that I cared about. But this voice also kept me from so much more, from experiencing the joy of trying new things, of being silly and laughing at myself, from genuine connection that could survive a disappointment. And while it kept me from failing, it also kept me from picking back up and trying again. So I took notes from the constant horns and whistles of the busy city of Chennai, and I started to challenge this voice, and the voice started to get quieter. I've talked about these boxes I've worked on unpacking and digressed from the assigned question a little bit of how this experience influenced my professional direction. And I tried really hard to write this question the answer to this question so many times, and I just couldn't get an answer that seemed right. They all felt removed and stiff. They missed the point of my experience. I believe to do this work, we have to combine ourselves and our personal and our professional selves to ensure that we have the empathy to help our clients and the vulnerability to sometimes be wrong, but to make the necessary repairs and to move on. So what did I learn about myself as a professional this summer? I learned more about myself personally so that I can work better professionally. I learned that I enjoy learning about new cultures and the impact it has on people, both individually and systematically. I learned that I love working with a team that knows how to have fun. I relearned that I enjoy research and I love learning. And finally, I learned that I really enjoy working when there's air conditioning. Thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Susan Mertz and I spent the summer in Colombo, Sri Lanka working with Family Rehabilitation Center, which serves the entire country of Sri Lanka. So today I'm going to be reading a poem by Valsa George, who's an Indian poet, and it's titled My Fractured Identity. After years of aimless wanderings, leaving behind the cities of midnight revels and the fevered journey in metro rails, I am back at the land of my people. Wherever I went, under whichever roof I slept, I had carried my land as a jewel in a casket and ensured it rested safe, ever under my pillow. As I moved with aliens, unable to merge with their cultural mores, I saw my land glimmer in darkness, like a dewdrop on a moon-blanched leaf. When I sweated in the blistering sands, a patch of green landscape, like an oasis, wafted me in a cool embrace. Then dreams poured in like starlight, and I wandered in the meadows of my youthful love, my heart struggling to forget old longings and memories lashing upon me like tidal waves. Pursued by that inalienable shadow, suddenly being born in flesh and blood, I hastened to the street of my youth, with hopes galore and dreams vivid. But alas, there is none to recognize me. I am a stranger here, an unwelcome stranger among total strangers. Now I wonder, which is truly my land? The one I left behind, or the one just landed in? So I have the microphone, so I guess I'm gonna go. Great. So as I said, I was in Colombo, Sri Lanka, and so every day I sat about a foot apart from my country partner, Charles. It's back there. It's great. We got to really know each other, and I think one of the daily tasks that I really enjoyed, this is gonna sound funny, but it was actually a great way to get to know our coworkers, was something Charles coined the biscuit challenge. And so there's a bunch of different like cookies, which people call biscuits in Sri Lanka. And we like tried the different brands and saw which ones people liked the most. And so it was just like a great way to get to know the people and like what they really enjoyed. And it was just a funny thing to do every week. So I think that was my favorite thing. I think that you were asking an actual professional question, but that was my answer. That's my answer to that.
Well, I guess the microphone's in front of me, so this is how this works. I actually had a really interesting experience where one of my patients identifies as a South Korean female, and she was feeling I work at an eating disorder clinic, and so a lot of the struggles that I deal with my patients is surrounding meal times and trying to model healthy behaviors. And one of my patients was feeling really frustrated that she was being asked to eat like an Asian dish, but with a fork. And she said, this isn't how I would eat this meal. I would eat this with chopsticks if I was at home. If you're going to make me eat, at least make me eat how I want to eat. And so her team was saying like, no, this is the rules. We use forks and knives and however we eat meals. And I said, I was like, could we maybe apply some cultural humility here and say that this is what's normal for her? She eats with chopsticks. Can we just give her some chopsticks? And they were like, well, we'll think about it. And they ended up coming back after staffing the next day, and they were like, Susie Q can have chopsticks. Not her real name. That's my like go-to fake name. But they were like, Susie Q can have some chopsticks, and she can eat certain meals with her chopsticks. And she came up to me, and she was so thrilled. She's like, Megan, you got me chopsticks. And I was so touched that it was something so small that I just could advocate for her, but get her something that was really meaningful to her.
So I went into this program and this international experience knowing that I really like being able to apply multiculturalism to psychology. And so I think my international experience definitely validated that. The thing that I found, I think, most difficult about being abroad this summer was, I guess, being away from the people that I cared about and loved the most, like not having that social support that was really important to me, and kind of having to reestablish myself in a new location that was entirely different and not comfortable. So it's not to say that I wouldn't be interested in another international experience. It's just that this was my first one where I was actually thrown into it and was expected to work in this type of setting. So I learned a lot. I'll try it again and see what happens after that, I guess.
Any other questions?
One of my favorite logistical things that Heather and I got to experience was Frogger. in the streets. Traffic does not stop. The only way to get traffic to stop is to put your hand in front. Supposedly this makes it okay and the cars will stop for you. But Heather and I, we had this really interesting experience of at the end of our trip, we were walking back to the metro station to get to the airport and fly home. And we thought, why didn't we do this when we got here? We should have taken the metro, and it's right next to the YWCA that we stayed at. And we realized that there was no way 8 weeks ago we were going to be able to walk through traffic the same way that we did. There was just a really vast difference between the kind of culture that existed and the way that we functioned on a daily basis. That it came eventually with time that we were able to adapt to it, but we had to be really patient with ourselves to start. That it wasn't going to come in that first week. We weren't going to just suddenly be able to ace that Frogger game. It took 8 weeks, and then going through Frogger with 2 heavy suitcases while I've got Heather in tow behind me, and it was great. Does that answer the question? Okay, cool.
Yeah. Great. Maybe a last question? Any last question? You happy? Okay, great. Thank you guys so much.
I can't help you here.
Thanks for getting